Hey everybody, welcome to Ideological with Zach Lee. I hope that you are doing great. Today we're going to be talking about postmodernism. What is postmodernism? Postmodernism is the air we breathe right now. It is the biggest cultural current that we are seeing, and it doesn't come out of a vacuum. There are decades-long and maybe even centuries-long ideas that have trickled into today. But one of the questions I get asked the most is, why is everything so weird? Why has culture changed so quickly? It's not as though this generation's just different than a previous generation that was different than the generation before that. Things have gotten stranger. We now have phrases we used to not have, like her penis, or math is racist, or, that's just your opinion, or even new terms like intersectionality and hegemony and wokeness and some of these other things. Where do these things come from? Well, today I'm going to explain where these things come from because there is a history when it comes to ideas that led us to today. So we're going to be talking about postmodernism, and it should be a ton of fun. This is going to be somewhat lecture style because this is kind of a heady topic, but I'm just going to jump right in. If we divide Western history crassly into three different time periods, there's different ways to divide history. You can argue with historians about this, blah, blah, blah. There's really three main ones, though, in Western history. There's the pre-modern era. That's before the Enlightenment, okay? Before the 1600s, before the 1700s, i.e. the 17th and 18th century. That is known as the pre-modern era, sometimes excluding Greco-Roman thought. And then you have the modern era, which is the Enlightenment. And then now we are in the postmodern era. So the easiest way to explain postmodernism is really to start there. Let's talk about the pre-modern era. So this is before the Enlightenment, okay? How did people view things in the pre-modern era? Here's the big thing you need to know. Again, I'm trying to summarize just like thousands of years of history. Truth was real. People believed in truth. People believed that you could find truth. It was out there. You could go discover it. But truth was found or discovered by revelation. Yes, you could know things through logic. Yes, you could know things through philosophy. But really, truth was discovered, the most important truths, rather, were discovered by revelation. It is something that God or the gods have to reveal to you. That's how you find the most important things. So notice that they're big on logic, they're big on reasoning, but truth is primarily discovered through revelation. So their worldview, if you have to summarize it in one word, is supernatural. In the modern era, truth is still discoverable, but the difference is truth is now discoverable by reason, science, and philosophy. Human reason, science, and philosophy is now where we find our most important truths. So we've moved on from the modern era, with even luminaries like someone like a Martin Luther. He's still very much of a medieval man. If he goes for a walk in the woods, he kind of expects to run into a demon or a goblin or something like that, because he's still very influenced by the supernatural worldview of the Middle Ages. In the modern era, so we're talking about Bacon and Descartes through Kant, although Kant's kind of an anti-Enlightenment figure. We'll talk about that in another episode. So we're in the 1600s and 1700s now, the 17th and 18th century. And so in the pre-modern era, truth is discovered by revelation. In the modern era, truth is discovered by human reason, science, and philosophy. We have this flourishing in the intellectual world of bettering people's lives. The Enlightenment is this period where we grow in political rights, we grow in scientific knowledge, we grow in philosophical knowledge. We've already grown in artistic knowledge through the Renaissance, but that's where we're at in the modern era. So pre-modern, truth is discovered by revelation. Modern, truth is discovered by human reason, science, and philosophy. Pre-modern, the worldview is supernatural, whereas in the modern time period, reality was naturalistic and mechanistic. That's one of the reasons Isaac Newton's such a big deal. It's not because apples just fall on his head and people love when apples fall on someone's head. It's because he's moving from a worldview of Aristotle, where everything has a teleology, it has a purpose, there's a reason why it happens, to all these mechanistic laws, all these physical laws that, though he believes in some type of creator, that's really just the thing that gets it started, and then the mechanism, the machine works on its own. That's the modern era. We are now, though, in the postmodern era, which starts after the modern era to tiny degrees, but really doesn't start till the 1960s and then moving into today. And its view of truth is that truth is now actually a way to oppress people. So when people talk about postmodernism, a lot of times they just say, well, it's the denial of absolute truth. That's true, but kind of naive. It's stronger than that. Truth is deconstructed. Pre-modern, truth is discovered by revelation. Modern, truth is discovered by reason. Postmodern, truth is deconstructed. Truth is no longer objective, but rather a veiled power play to oppress people, okay? The worldview here is political and non-rational. So not supernatural like in pre-modern, not rational and mechanistic like in modern, but rather political and non-rational, okay? Sometimes actually irrational would be better than non-rational. So, that's a quick history of, Western thought. Let's talk about postmodernism. Let me give you a great definition of it, and it's super long. It might put you to sleep. It's a long definition, but it's a really great definition. It comes from a guy named Lawrence Cahoon, who's a philosophy professor that's excellent on this topic. Let me read you the definition. All right. When most philosophers use the word postmodernism, they mean to refer to a movement that developed in France in the 1960s, more precisely called post-structuralism. Let me pause. We're going to talk about post-structuralism in a second. They have in mind that this movement denies the possibility of objective knowledge of the real world, univocal, singular primary meaning of words and text, the unity of the human self, the cogency of the distinctions between rational inquiry and political action, literal and metaphorical meaning, science and art, and even the possibility of truth itself. Simply put, they regard it as rejecting most of the fundamental intellectual pillars of modern Western civilization. They may further associate this rejection with political movements like multiculturalism and feminism, which sometimes regard the rejected notions as the ideology, that's our word, as the ideology of a privileged sexual, ethnic, and economic group, and aim to undermine established educational and political authorities and transfer the power of the previously disenfranchised. I'm not going to read that again. That is a bit of a boner killer of a definition, but I think that it's helpful in summarizing this worldview, and we're going to kind of break this down as we go. Some of the major figures in postmodernism. Who are the major thinkers? Well, there's a few guys. There's Jacques Derrida, there's Michel Foucault, there's Jean-François Lyotard, there's Jean Baudrillard, there is Richard Rorty, and others. There's a bunch more, but those are the big ones. Now notice, Richard Rorty's not, but notice how many of these guys are French. Okay, this is very much of a French intellectual movement that is now very much in America. There's only 3 good things that have ever come out of France, by the way, and they are Bordeaux wine, lingerie, and René Descartes. That's it. Those are really the only good things. French fries, I think, didn't come out of France. You can fact check me on that, but I don't think that they came out of France. And the greatest of those 3 things is obviously lingerie. Obviously, it's lingerie is the greatest of those 3 things. So with these thinkers, you have guys like Derrida, who puts a major emphasis in postmodernism on language, how we can't find the true meaning of a text, so we have to playfully read political and cultural concepts into it. We have guys like Foucault, whose major emphasis is using truth and objectivity as a power play to oppress people. We have guys like Richard Rorty, whose major emphasis is that we should seek to harmonize our view with our current tribe and be nice to each other along the way. There's a lot of squishiness in postmodernism. So let's jump into the stuff. That's a big introduction. To be really clear, before I say everything I'm about to say, this is not a political lecture. Where does Zach land politically? I hope that you never find out. I hope I just challenge you from all these different directions. This is not a political lecture. The things I'm saying, if you think they're political, that's how much you've been influenced by postmodernism. I'm going to just let that set for a second. If you think what I'm about to say is political, because these are comments that would have been super normal, 20 years ago. If you think what I'm about to say is political, that's how much you've been influenced by postmodernism and you don't even freaking know it. So let's talk about postmodernism. Major ideas. Number 1, truth oppresses people by creating an in-group and an out-group. The in-group called the hegemony and the out-group. Postmodernism is not just saying truth is relative. All truth is different for different people, blah, blah, blah. They do say that, but they're saying something worse than that. They're saying there is not a the truth, capital T, and more than that, that all claims to know truth are actually a power play to oppress people. When you have a truth, let's say I say 2 + 2 is 4, that creates an in-group, the people that know math. And then the people that are outside that group are now oppressed just because they're not in the in-group. I've created an in-group and I've created an out-group. The in-group has the power because when you claim to have truth, that's a type of power, and the out-group doesn't have that. If I'm straight, then me and my straight group is saying we are holding the truth, and then those who are not straight are in the out-group. We're the hegemony and they're not. If I am white and I'm in a culture like in America where there are more white people than black people, then I create this power structure of an in-group and an out-group. So They see all claims to truth as actually power plays. Let me give you two quotes. Jean-Francois Lyotard says, "Reason and power are one and the same." So notice what he's saying there. He's saying to make a claim for truth is actually a way to have power over people. And then implied by his argument that having power over people is bad, which is something we can debate in another lecture. If we are, from an evolutionary perspective, you should try to have power over other people. You should try to make sure your genes succeed, etc. From a religious worldview, to be right is very important. From a non-religious worldview, to be right is very important. So there's some interesting concepts here. We'll deal with those in other lectures. Michel Foucault says, "It is meaningless to speak in the name of or against reason, truth, or knowledge." Okay? Those are not really things to be obtained. They're just ways of oppressing people. Now, let me tell you why this is so interesting. I don't give on this show a lot of my own views and presuppositions. I don't want people to know where I land. It's more fun that way. Sometimes you can tell, but it's more fun that way. When it comes to postmodernism, though, I do need to say that this is unlike other philosophical movements. This is an anti-philosophy. It is an acid. For all of history, humans have been trying to find what's true, whether that's true in medicine, that's true in religion, that's true in astronomy, that's true in how to make crops grow, that's true in what works in marriage and what doesn't work, whatever it might be. Postmodernism is saying the goal of finding truth is actually evil. The goal of finding truth is actually bad. Think about how powerful that's like. For all of history, we're trying to make medicines to heal people, and then a doctor comes along and he's like, what if we just made medicine's bad to heal people? Let's just try to kill all the people. That's kind of what it's like saying when you say the goal should not be to find truth. The goal for the philosopher, for the thinker, should not be to find truth. It's that strong. Now, here's what you need to understand. The postmodernists will say that they're doing that to help previously disenfranchised groups. They're trying to take those who are in power and take them off their throne so that they can help the previously disenfranchised. Here's what's really interesting. That's not what the postmodernist is doing. The postmodernist is trying to put themselves in power. Once you say that everybody who has a claim to truth is trying to have power over people, and they're all wrong, then who's the only one left who's right? The postmodernists. They're not modern-day Robin Hood, who's trying to steal from the rich and give to the poor. They are only exalting marginalized groups that help their agenda. They're not exalting all marginalized groups, just people that they can step on their back to exalt their agenda. The goal of the postmodernists, ironically, is to have all the power. They're saying that other people are trying to have a power play, and it's their ultimate power play. Let me give you a great quote by intellectual historian Carl Trueman. He says this when it comes to postmodernism not actually exalting all marginalized groups. He says this, "Interestingly enough, the other," right, meaning the marginalized, "is rarely defined by such postmoderns in terms with which the middle-class intelligentsia would be uncomfortable. Members of the Ku Klux Klan, Holocaust deniers, serial killers, and collectors of other people's toenail clippings would all seem to have first-rate claims to having been marginalized and written out of the dominant narratives of this world. But none, so far as I know, enjoys the support of a significant postmodern lobby group." What he's saying, by the way, is not to support the KKK or to support people that collect other people's toenail clippings. I would say that both of those groups are bad. Rather, it is to say the postmoderns are not really exalting everyone who doesn't have a voice. They're just picking people that they say don't have a voice to give the postmodernists themselves a voice. Number 2, utopianism. Utopianism. A postmodernist is mad at the results of the modern world because it's not perfect. Utopianism is this idea that we can have a society or a state that is perfect, where everything is fine. And so there's this utopianism, you see this in Marxism too, but you see this utopianism in postmodernism, which is upset with the way that the world is now because it's not perfect, because there's still injustice, because there's still crime, because there's still sickness, because there's still economic inequality, whatever it might be. There's a desire then to break down and tear down the world we live in so that we can achieve utopia. Let me just say this very strongly. Utopianism will never happen. You will never be able to get all the bad things in the world to just go away. The Enlightenment's amazing. And the Enlightenment's probably the single biggest period in human history that produced practical human flourishing. The reason we have political rights and we elect our leaders, the reason that we have science, that I can take medicine and when I get a blister, I don't die, the reason that we can transplant a heart, the reason that We have toleration towards people of different worldviews and stuff. That's all because of the Enlightenment. It's fantastic. But when you think that the world could have actually just been perfect, well, let's just tear down everything from the Enlightenment and build something from scratch. So there is a utopianism that they are trying to achieve. And so I once heard a historian say this. I thought it was really interesting. He said the difference between whether or not you are modern or postmodern has to do with whether or not you have gratitude. Do you say things are pretty good? They're not perfect. There's a lot of injustice, but things are pretty good. Or do you say, because things are not the way I want it, because other people have better lives than me, I am not grateful, I am pissed. And so postmodernism, in a sense, stems out of that. Now, this is why, listen to this, because this is a major part of postmodernism. This is why traditional institutions have to be destroyed. Traditional institutions create a way that people think that is very Enlightenment, that is very modern, and we're trying to get rid of modernism. If you're a postmodernist, we're trying to get rid of that. This is why you see attacks on the nuclear family and the redefinition of that. It's why you see attacks on the church. It's why you see attacks on certain political institutions, people tearing down statues, whatever. Again, this is not I'm not giving my comments politically on this. I'm just talking about a philosophical movement. It's why you see changes in the military and who's allowed to fight in certain roles and who's not. It's a complete upending of traditional society. That is the goal of the postmodernist. It's why you see historical revisionism, where you act like people in the past thought the way that we think today, which is just not true. I'm a big history guy. I'm an intellectual historian. History is a fascinating thing because it's so not the way we think today. Okay. And this is also why you now see, for the longest time, postmodernism was really only in the humanities, right? Literary departments and English departments and philosophy departments and that kind of stuff. You now even see it in science, getting into the hard sciences. This is why gender is no longer biologically determined by whether or not your body is preset for a certain type of reproduction of the human species. It's how someone identifies or how they feels, which is not science, but it's in the scientific field now. You also see this with fat studies, where you now you have doctors saying that somebody who is morbidly obese is just as healthy as somebody who's fit and in shape, which again is not true. It doesn't mean they're not people, they're not valuable as people, but you now see it even getting into science, which is fascinating. Number 3. Do we need a break? Everybody good? I find this stuff fascinating, but if you need just a quick power nap, pause this, get yourself a drink, wait 2 minutes and come back. Let's get into number 3. Mankind in postmodernism is born naturally good or neutral, and human identity is socially constructed. Let me say something very strong. Are you ready? I say a lot of strong things. Your politics will be completely determined by whether or not you think that humans are naturally bad or naturally good or neutral. That's what will determine the rest of your politics. Your claim to political science or political philosophy is really a claim to anthropology. If you think people are naturally good, well, then we can educate the criminals so that they won't commit crime. We can educate the person who sexually assaults somebody so that they don't do that, right? The reason that they did that wasn't their fault. It was some sort of cultural conditioning around them. If you think that people are naturally good, you want a bigger government because you want, if people are good, the bigger government's going to help more people. It's going to help more of the disenfranchised. If someone shoots up a school, the problem's not them. They probably had a terrible home life. They had access to guns. They shouldn't have had all that. And so the problem is the gun. And so if you think people are naturally good or neutral, then that's the direction you're going to go in your politics. You tell me what you think of human nature, and I'll tell you where you land on the political spectrum. If you think people, though, are naturally bad, and this doesn't even necessarily mean from a religious perspective, right? So obviously, after the Enlightenment, the view in the pre-modern era is that humans were born sinful and bad. That's a big thing with Augustinian Christianity, which really is Western Christianity, Protestant and Catholic. That's really the big thing. But I'm saying even if you have a non-religious worldview, if we have evolved so that we can spread our genes, have dominance over other people, and do things to our advantage. And so even there, you might say that humans are naturally bad. That's what's going to determine your politics. Well, the postmodernist sees people as either naturally good or neutral. In theological terms, that's called Pelagianism. And we're socially constructed. We don't come preset. Humans don't have a preset essence. We are constructed by the society and the culture around us. So that is very different than the pre-modern world and the modern world, which saw humans as having an essence. There's something that a human is supposed to be. There's something that a human is by nature. There's like a blueprint for what a human should be. Not in postmodernism. You are socially constructed, okay? This is where postmodernism is more correctly called post-structuralism. Let's get into some real geeky stuff here. Structuralism is something in both anthropology and in linguistics and in other areas. But structuralism is going to say that there is an underlying structure to humans and to human consciousness. So in anthropology, there's a guy, his name's Claude Lévi-Strauss, and he's kind of the father of modern structuralism. And what he would do is he would study different cultures and tribes and say, they have different myths, they have different stories, they have different histories, but there's this underlying way that humans kind of structurally think. And it plays out in different cultures, but there's this innateness within this culture as it speaks to each other. There's this underlying structure. For the linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, the way that he talked about how our words mean things, and I'm going to have a whole lecture, by the way, on philosophy of language, the way that he describes how our words mean things is by, we have signs that are different than other signs. So if I want to know what hot means, I contrast it to cold. If I want to know what man means, I contrast it to woman. And so there's this inherent structure as we compare and contrast differences in signs. So languages will be different languages, whether it's French or German or Spanish or whatever. But there's this underlying structure of the way that we think and the way that words specifically differ from other words. And that is called structuralism. Ugh, so boring, Zach. Shoot me. Okay, so the post-structuralist, though, the postmodernist, is going to say that's not true. That doesn't exist. Everything is just culturally constructed. There's not this underlying essence. There's not this underlying essence in language. There's not this underlying essence in different cultures and in anthropology. They're going to disagree with the structuralist. I'll explain that with a guy named Jacques Derrida here in a second. He takes Saussure's idea and turns it on its head. Number 4, there is no objective way of viewing the world. Postmodernism is anti-realist. What is realism? Realism is this idea that definitions and essences and facts are out there in the world, and our job is to go discover them, okay? So we go see what's in the world and we learn things, and those things in the world, those definitions and essences are true even before we think about them. And our job is to discover them. It's called realism. Well, postmodernism is anti-realist, okay? They do not want, the postmodernist doesn't want anything that is objective apart from the way we view them. Number 5, reader response theory. By the way, at the end of this, I'm going to have some very practical things. You're thinking, okay, Zach, this is all very technical. Can you give me some ways that I've heard about this in culture? Where's this direction going? I'm going to give you all that, but you've got to sit through the boring stuff before I give you the secret sauce. Reader response theory. This is number 5. And the inability for a text to have univocal meaning. What does that mean? The traditional view of understanding language or understanding a text is this. I, as an author or a writer, have an idea, and I want you to have that idea. So let's say I'm trying to trick my wife into drinking a little bit more than she should so that she gets more tipsy because she's funnier if she does that. I have this idea in my mind. And I say something to her, honey, would you like another glass of champagne? Because you look so beautiful right now. And she thinks, yes. What does Zach mean by that? He wants me to have another glass of champagne. So I have another glass of champagne, and then she gets bubbly, which is kind of a play on words with what champagne is anyway. So I have this idea. I'm trying to get her to think the idea. So I open this hole in my face called a mouth, and I make some sounds, and then she thinks the same idea, and then she's giggly, and we're telling jokes, and it's a ton of fun. Okay. I am the author. I determine the meaning. Her job is to hear the words or read the words if it's something written and try to figure out what I mean. In traditional views of hermeneutics, the science of interpretation, the author determines the meaning of the text. He puts it into a text, and then the reader is trying to figure out what the author means. And if you don't believe me, this is the natural way we communicate. If you don't understand what somebody said, guess what you do? You say, what did you mean by that? Oh my gosh, it's the traditional view. Well, for guys like Jacques Derrida, he's going to say, no. That's not how language works. All authors are dead authors. We don't try to find the meaning from the author. We, as the reader, try to determine the meaning, and we can't even do that. So our job is just to playfully mess with the text for political and cultural purposes. Holy crap, what does that mean? Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm Jacques Derrida, and I'm this debonair Frenchman, and I'm pitching this idea to you, and I want to explain it to you in layman's terms. And I say, okay, how do you know the meaning of the word cat? Well, you look it up in a dictionary. And so you look it up in a dictionary and I say, what did the dictionary give you? And you say, well, I guess just more words. Okay. And I say, great, look those up. And then you have to look them up. So you look at the word cat and maybe it's, something about a household pet. Then you got to look at the word pet. And then you got to look up the word house. And then you got to look up what's related to house, flooring, tile, ceiling. Then you got to look up what's related to different kinds of pets. Then you got to look up the word related to dog. Then you got to look up the word related to owner. You never actually get to the meaning of the word cat. Words are, to use this phrase, polysemic. They have a bunch of meanings, but we can't get beyond the text. We just never get to the essence of what we're trying to define. Words give us just definitions of more words ad infinitum. And so texts don't have meaning in the traditional sense. Okay? This is him contrasting with guys like Saussure. For Saussure, we get meanings in words by contrasting them with other words within a linguistic system. For Derrida, that's the very reason we can't know what words and sentences and passages and books and stuff mean. Now, where does this play out practically? Why does the postmodernist care so much that you get their pronouns right? Because if words don't have actual meaning, they don't have essences, then they're just weapons. They're just power plays. To misgender somebody is you attacking them because there is no actual essence of what a gender is. Words are just weapons. This is why so many postmodernists will create ad hominem attacks. They will be mean. They will be rude. They will yell. They will riot. They will burn things down, is because if words don't have meaning that we can access traditionally, then they're just weapons. Number 6, the exaltation of experience and emotion over reason and logic. For the postmodernists, a second ago I said your politics will be determined by your anthropology. Your view on whether or not you'll be postmodern really determines on whether or not you think logic and reason is more important or you think feeling and emotion is more important. Again, the traditional view in all of Western history is that logic and reason is more important because that's what's true. Your feelings and emotions are not bad, they're just not always true, right? It's not like we're trying to be robots. Emotions give color to life, but that's not where you go to find truth. You don't listen to your heart because your heart lies to you. Instead, you listen to your mind because you do facts and you do mathematics and you argue and you debate. The postmodernist does not want any of that. This is why they don't want logical debate. When you do that, you could lose. As soon as you're doing debate. So when people say our culture's so divided, why can't we just sit down and chat with each other? The postmodernist doesn't want to sit down and chat because that's playing into a modernist worldview. That says that there's a truth and we can know it through debate, reason, and argumentation, and they don't want this. This is why somebody that's postmodern can charge you, for example, of being a racist, even if you're not, and you're not allowed to say anything back. So if someone says, Zach, you're a racist, and I say, whoa, I'm not a racist at all. I think all races have equal human value. And they say, you see how racist you are? You can't even see it. You have white blindness and you can't even see it. There is no debate. If I say to them, okay, what would prove you wrong? What evidence could I give you that I'm not a racist? They don't have an answer for that because they don't want to have the debate because that's playing into a view of truth. And the postmodernist does not want a view of truth that is binding on all people. They want truth to be a socially constructed power play to oppress other people. Okay? It's interesting. They want to put themselves beyond critique. It's the same thing the Marxist does when you say, hey, Marxism is an abject failure. It will never work. What do they say? 100% of the time, well, it's never been tried. There is no evidence you could give them to just show them that it's a dumb theory. Marxism can't be tried. We'll have a whole lesson on Marxism, but Marxism can't be tried. It is a philosophical failure. It has logical contradictions built within. That's why Marxism didn't start in the most developed capitalistic nations, which Marx said it must. It's why you can't vote in Marxism like people are trying to do. It has to be through violent overthrow of the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. It's based on a view of human nature that's good. And humans tend to be somewhat selfish. And so the Marxist, the person that thinks everyone's a racist, whatever it is, they're all elements of postmodernism because it seeks to remove the debate. It seeks to say, I'm right and there's nothing you can tell me that would make me wrong. That's what they're doing. Number 7, part of postmodernism is this, the persecution of those previously in power. So the traditional view of justice is, let's say I wrong somebody. The idea is I wrong this person, and justice would be punishing me and making me make restitution for that person, and then we would be back to stasis. Then things would be done. For the postmodernists, there is an eternal debt that if somebody has been in power, if somebody has oppressed others, they must pay for it forever. There is no forgiveness. There is no reconciliation. It's a very anti-reconciliation movement. It wants to punish those who are previously in power forever. When you hear that a cop shot somebody, you will, whether it was a just shooting or not, instantly jump to the idea that maybe it wasn't, because police are in a position of power. And so our thought, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. Sometimes police justly shoot people, sometimes they don't. But we jump to the fact that it's probably not a just shooting. As soon as we hear, cop shoots unarmed, whatever, we just assume that he did something bad. That's because we have an aversion, because we live in a postmodern era. We have an aversion to people that previously were in power. And so there's a tendency in the postmodern movement to want to punish people who were traditionally in power forever. Let me give you a very practical example. Let's say someone goes up to BLM and they say, hey, listen, I've done racist things in the past. I'm so sorry. What could our society do to fully be forgiven? How much money do we need to pay out in reparations? How many times do we need to get down on our knees and apologize? How many times do we need to declare we're racist? And let's not even say this gender, let's say for the next several hundred years. If your people have been oppressed for hundreds of years, we will make restitution for hundreds of years. What could we do so that this issue is finally forgiven? Do you know the answer? Nothing. They don't want forgiveness. They want this to be an eternal oppressing your previous oppressor. I'm just using one example on the race issue. This is true with the LGBTQ community. This is true with feminism. This is true with Marxism. This is true with all these kind of things, right? So again, this is not a left versus. I'm explaining our culture. I'm not saying I agree or don't agree with any of the things that I'm saying. I'm just trying to explain to you how we got here. And so even things for the postmodernist that were traditional normal things. See, even saying normal, they would say I'm being too modern. That's okay. I'm a very Enlightenment guy. I'm a modern man. They would say even normal things like this are naturally oppressive. So Catherine McKinnon, who's a feminist postmodernist thinker, even talks about the normal relationship of heterosexual sex being oppressive. She's got a great phrase where she says, man fucks woman, subject, verb, object. It's a powerful sentence, but even something like heterosexual sex is now just one more attempt at oppressing people. Number 8, hatred of some people being better than others. The postmodernists love egalitarianism, which means where everyone is equal in society in all ways, in a sense. And so the goal is not legal equality, okay? Equity and equality are not the same. Egalitarianism and equality are not the same. The goal is not legal equality. You already have legal equality, okay? Everybody in America, where I'm recording this, at least for now, has legal equality before the law, okay? The goal for the postmodernists is equality of outcome. It's equality of results. It's not equality of standing before the law where no one can get in your way and you can go attack life. Some people start off further than others behind the starting line, but if you work hard, you get educated, you push, you can achieve great things. It hates that view. It wants equality of outcome, equality of result. It punishes the winners. That's part of postmodernism. Number 9, political collectivism over individualism and a hatred of capitalism. I'm going to have a whole lesson on Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who I think is the devil. But postmodernism is really the triumph of Rousseau over John Locke, of Jean-Jacques Rousseau over John Locke. And so it is the exaltation of collectivism instead of individualism. The view from guys like Locke, and then later on like John Stuart Mill and others, is that what is best for society is to give people individual rights. That is what's best for the community. We're not saying let's exalt the individual over the community. We're saying what's best for the community is individual rights. But the postmodernists hate that. And they also hate capitalism. They are purely collectivist, okay? They are purely collectivist. They want things in terms of society, groupthink, etc. One philosopher that I like mentioned a comment that I thought was really, really brilliant. He said, if postmodernists don't believe in this universal, all-binding truth, you would think that when it comes to politics, they'd be all over the spectrum. If there's not like one binding truth on everybody and all attempts at truth are a power play, you would think you would have postmodernists all over the political spectrum. But here's something that's crazy. 100% of the major postmodernists, 100%, are left or far left. That's interesting. Shouldn't they be all over the place? Again, if there's not this universal binding truth, there's not a universal essence to what a human is, then you would think that they would be all over the spectrum, and yet 100% of them are left or far left. It's really fascinating. This is why everything is politicized. So what was the biggest debate in politics, I don't know, 60 years ago? Social Security? It was economic, something like that. Now everything's politicized. Women's bathrooms, Chick-fil-A, the Washington's football team, everything that comes out, people on social media will instantly jump right or left. Everything is divided and politicized. Where does that come from? That comes from viewing man as an economic animal, which is Marx's view, right? Marx's view is that what determines everything in history is economics. It's this power class struggle between rich and poor. When you view man as primarily an economic being, not a spiritual being for someone like Augustine, right? Not just a sexual being for somebody like Freud. There's different ways to view humans, not as just a political being from somebody like, Plato or Aristotle or whatever. When you view man as an economic being, then everything becomes political, because politics is no longer there just to talk about economics. It's there to talk about everything. And they hate capitalism. So let me give you a great quote from Jean-Francois Lyotard. He says this: Saddam Hussein. So here's a quote that he's going to give in encouragement of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein is a product of Western departments of state and big companies, just as Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco were born of the peace imposed on their countries by the victors of the Great War. Saddam is such a product in an even more flagrant and cynical way. Because the Iraqi dictatorship proceeds, as do the others, from the transfer of aporias to the capitalist system to vanquished, less developed, or simply less restrained countries. Capitalism is the problem, so much so that it's creating these villains. They're not actually villains. That's essentially what he's saying. So they don't want individual freedom. And here's why. Individual freedom allows for dissent. To make postmodernism work, if you're going to upend all of society and create a new society, a new utopia, what you have to do is you have to get rid of the dissenters. You have to have a very, very large majority that agrees with you, which is why they do not want freedom of thought. They do not want individualism, because then people won't go along with the system. They won't go along with the regime. Number 10, deconstruction. Deconstructionism is obviously big when it comes to postmodernism. The goal is to destroy every pillar that holds to a universal truth until everything is destroyed. I want to be very clear. Postmodernism is not a benign movement. It's not just an intellectual fad. It has teeth to it. The goal is to deconstruct everything. It's to take everything, overanalyze it, tear it apart so that it means nothing, so that the postmodernist, again, can be in power. They will not stop till everything is destroyed. They will come for everything. You see postmodernism in art. You see it in culture. You see it in politics. You see it in philosophy. You see it in religion. You see it in science. Everything is influenced. This is a huge movement of our day. And it is an acid that is meant to eat up everything so you can have a new start where everyone can be equal and where there are no problems. It is a religion. It is a salvation that they are promising you. Let me give you a great example of this in art. Throughout a lot of history, art has been to represent what's in reality. Maybe you make a tree of chalk or you make a tree of paint, but you're making a tree. Then you can have more abstract art. You can have the Jackson Pollocks throwing paint on there, and it still looks really beautiful. There's still something important to it. It's an essence. There's not just something that's pure deconstruction. In postmodern art, that's what you have. So Andres Serrano was an artist who's famous for a piece of art called Piss Christ, where he just took a crucifix and put it in a tub of urine. Notice what he's doing there. He's just deconstructing. He's just trying to destroy art. What do the postmodernists do today? They go to museums and they take paint and they take cans of soup and they just throw it on famous pieces of art. And people are like, that's so weird. Why are they doing that? That makes total sense to me. Postmodernism ends with just deconstruction. And here's something you have to keep in mind. What's next? What's after that deconstruction? Okay. Let's transition. We're almost done. Hang in there. You're doing fantastic. You're going to impress your friends on how smart you are. You're going to tell them about ideological. I'm going to become a millionaire and use it to oppress people, because that's what I'm told that I'm going to do from the postmodernists. Let's have some words or phrases in our culture where you see the influence of postmodernism. Okay. Just because you've said these doesn't mean you're necessarily being postmodern, but I want you to understand how these play out in our culture. And if you use these, saying something's different than using something. Saying a word is different than using the word. If you use these, you might be more influenced in postmodernism than you think. Let me give you a few. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is sometimes used by the postmodernist when they're actually wrong and you're trying to show them why they're wrong. They'll just say, well, you're gaslighting me. They're trying to say, you're psychologically manipulating me into thinking I'm crazy. And I'm like, no, I'm just showing you logically where your argument fails, right? So gaslighting is a term they'll use. Finding or silencing your voice. We've got to let this group find their voice, or you've got to find your voice, or whatever it might be. Typically what they're saying is this is a marginalized group and you get to have your voice. You get to just yell louder and everyone should listen, whether you have something valuable to say or not. Again, the goal is not content and logic like it used to be. It's that. The term power dynamics, everything for the postmodernists is power dynamics. People that overemphasize tone or kindness. What they're doing is they're moving away. Reality is difficult, guys. Truth hurts sometimes. When a doctor says you've got pancreatic cancer and that's not good, that's true, and it's very difficult to hear. So people that emphasize tone or kindness are typically trying to say, don't give me truth. That's offensive. I don't like that. It makes me feel bad. And that is a part of postmodernism. Overuse of the phrase narrative or false narrative. People that use that too much are saying there's not an absolute truth. There's just a bunch of competing narratives or stories. Metaphorical uses of the term abuse or violence, right? They abused me and I'm like, they hit you in the mouth? And they're like, no, they hurt my feelings and I was abused. And I'm like, okay. It's not good always to hurt people's feelings. There are. I understand what they're saying by saying somebody was very emotionally mean to me. That's not good. But to use the term abuse is trying to say something stronger than is warranted. Or using the term violence, right? Your words are violence. They did violence to me. They attacked me. And I'm like, they attacked you? Like, again, they punched you in the mouth? And they're like, no, they said something mean on social media. It is a way of saying what the postmodernist says, words are weapons. There is no truth, right? The phrase is being seen, being heard, being understood. People saying that your words or your argument is unsafe or makes me feel unsafe. Validated. You need to earn validation. You don't get to just be validated because you want to. Privileged. Trauma. People use trauma. Man, I've got a lot of trauma. And I was like, what happened? And they're like, well, a guy beat me in an argument online. And I'm like, okay, trauma, right? Not caring for the whole person is a way to say, stop caring about logic and facts. Stop being right. Stop caring about truth. And instead, care for the whole person, which really just means my feelings and my emotions. Pride is a term the postmodernists used for people that want to be right. Right? Now, there's actual pride. And then you just want to be right. You just you're like, hey, I'm very humble. I'm not proud. I think 2 + 2 is 4. And they're like, you arrogant son of a bitch. You think that 2 + 2 is 4. That's how they do it. And so pride, people of color, microaggression, fragility, misogynistic, ungracious assumptions. You see what the postmodernist is doing and you call it out and they're like, you're coming at me with this narrative. You've got these ungracious assumptions. The term cis, like in cisgendered, is a postmodern term. They can't just say normal and transgender because then you have a hegemony. You have normal. So they have to create a new term and say cisgender. We have to take a term out of science from another field. Cis was already a term. And then apply it to how one identifies with their gender because it has to be, it's one or the other. It's just an option. Are you cisgender or are you trans? You can't just say normal and trans. So they have to add a new term for that. The phrase, it's not binary. I love when people say it's not binary because then I say, okay, great. So now we're in the binary of things that are binary and things that are not binary. We're stuck again, right? It's too binary. Okay, so there are things that are too binary and things that are not too binary. What they're trying to do by saying that is they're trying to get rid of truth. Some things are not binary, like what is the best ice cream flavor? Or that could actually be binary. Let me say it another way. I think I'm a big mint chocolate chip fan. Let me say it another way. People can have different ice cream flavors that they like. Okay, that's more than just two options. But even then, when I say some things are binary and some things are not, I'm back into a binary again. Anyway, triggered, marginalized, just wanting to be right. If somebody says you're just wanting to be right, what they're saying is you just care about knowing how the world works in truth, which will actually be the most loving thing to help people. But they pitch it as a bad thing to want to be right. Objectifying, intolerant, demeaning, being on the wrong side of history, which is interesting for people that have historical revisionism. Oppressor and oppressed, obviously that's a big thing for them. They see all the world in those two categories, oppressor and oppressed. Alienated, appeals to other demographics to displace truth. Neurodivergent, which can be a legitimate thing, but it can sometimes be used in ethical and not mental issues so that somebody doesn't judge you. Narcissist is a big one. Everybody gets called a narcissist if they're passionate. Everybody gets called a narcissist if they want to be right, okay? And the problem is that actually distracts from real narcissism, which can be very harmful. And so you get that. DEI and DEI departments, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion departments wokeness. What is wokeness? I'm not going to get into wokeness. That's a term that's thrown around too much. And in my opinion, I think maybe conservatives throw around the term wokeness too much. What is wokeness? Let me give you just the Zackley definition of wokeness. We might have a whole nother lesson on that. I don't know. Wokeness is how French 20th century postmodernism has made its way into mainstream 21st century America, especially in how it relates to categories of race, sex, sexual orientation, and social justice. Zach, what is wokeness? Wokeness is America's dumber version of French post-structuralism. We have a tendency sometimes with ideologies or ideologies, ideological, hashtag. We have a tendency sometimes to do things intellectually dumber than other countries. And wokeness is kind of America's version of French post-structuralism that we've just made dumber. Okay. In conclusion, where do we go from here? I'd say that's a pretty dang good lecture on postmodernism, but I'm a little bit biased. Somebody once told me that my personality reminds them of the comic book character Deadpool. And I didn't know what that meant. And then I watched the movies, because I'm not going to read a comic book because I'm not a nerd. But I watched the movies and I thought, this is my guy. This is my guy. So how would Zackley say that postmodernism, what's next? I have two thoughts on this. The first is this. Where do we go from here? We had pre-modernism, then modernism, and post. Now do we have postmodernism? And then post? How many tubs of urine do we need to put crucifixes in? Where do we go from here? One, I think that postmodernism eventually will eat itself. I think it will eat itself. Let me tell you why. The different groups that embrace certain postmodern ideologies, at their essence, they don't believe they have an essence, but they do. At their essence, they disagree with each other. So the feminist movement will team up with the trans movement. Why? That's part of intersectionality. I will team up with other marginalized groups, other people that feel oppressed, and it allows us to push back against the oppressor. What happens, though, is when the feminist teams up with the transgender community, they butt heads. The movements are ideologically opposed to each other. And so let me give you an example. If a trans woman became a president, became the president of the United States, would we say that we've now had the first female president? Well, the feminism community would hate that. The feministic community would hate that because they're like, no, that's not a real woman. I want a real woman to be president. And the trans community would say, that is a real woman. Trans women are women, you bigot, and they would have to fight. The community of feminism would say things like, men don't get a say on abortion, no uterus, no choice. And then a trans woman can get up and say, hey, I'm a woman, I don't have a uterus, I get a choice. And so their movements are going to keep clashing, okay? So feminists who disagree with transgenderism, what are called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, they are just trying to say, hey, you've jumped into our thing, and this is one more thing men have taken from us. That's really what they're saying. One more thing that men have taken from us now is even femininity and being a woman. So they clash. Or how the LGBTQ movement will team up with Islam and the pro-Palestine movement. They don't understand that those are ideologically opposed. You can't go try to be LGBTQ plus in Saudi Arabia. They will murder you. Okay. And so I think eventually postmodernism will eat itself. And here's why. When you have pure deconstruction and you say that truth is bad, it's just a way of hurting people, there's nothing else you can build. You tear down everything, but you have nothing to replace it with which to replace it. Let's not end a sentence in a preposition. That's a problem. So I think eventually the movement will fizzle out and eat itself. I don't know how many dead bodies it will leave in its wake, but I think that's next. The other thing is, people still inherently know that logic is real. And so we still feel deep down that we're contradicting ourselves. The postmodernist is never consistent in their denial of truth. They never just walk in front of a bus and get hit by the bus and say, well, that's just your truth. That was just a power play to oppress me when you said, watch out for the bus. So I think postmodernism is kind of like the emperor's new clothes. We kind of lie to ourselves that we see the emperor's new clothes, even though we all see that he's actually naked. And so I think eventually it's really hard to suppress these truths that we know. I think humans are naturally either pre or postmodern. And so I think it's very hard to stomp that out regardless of how much we even try to be postmodern. I think we know that we're lying to ourselves. That's postmodernism. I hope that is helpful. Thanks for joining me on Ideological. I appreciate you tuning in.